Hello Year 8. This term you're going to be studying a selection of poems that all link to the idea of identity. And in this video I'm going to talk you through the concept of identity. We're going to have a look at how identity links to power, and then we're going to begin looking at the first of our poems, which is called Tissue. So this lesson is called Identity, Paper and Power. So your first task, you're going to do a 2-minute write, which basically means give yourself a couple of minutes to write your response to this question. If you go to our classroom on Google, you will see a form that is ready-made with all the questions that you'll get on this video. So you just need to find the question and then fill in the box that follows. So if we look at the word identity, identity is a noun because it's a thing. It's a concept, and etymologically, so originally, the word meant sameness, oneness, or the state of being the same. And the word originated in France in the 14th century and was ultimately from the Latin word idem, which meant the same. So idem meant the same. What I want you to do is write down your thoughts on the following question. What do you find interesting about the etymological meaning of the word identity? What do you find interesting about the fact that the meaning of the word identity is sameness? Okay, hopefully you were able to articulate your thoughts on the idea of identity meaning sameness. I imagine some of you might have made a link back to The Giver that we've just read by Lois Lowry also, which will be excellent. So here are some interpretations of identity. If you were to Google what is identity, these are the sorts of things that you might be able to find. So the first statement is from two people called Hogg and Abrams, who wrote a book in 1988 in which they said that identity is a person's concept of who they are, of what sort of person they are, and how they relate to others. So identity is a person's concept of who they are. Second person is somebody called Wendt in 1992, who wrote, identity is a relatively stable and role-specific understanding and expectation about the self. So identity is a relatively stable and role-specific understanding and expectation about the self. And then finally, somebody called Deng in 1995 wrote that identity is the way we define ourselves in terms of race, religion, ethnicity, language and culture. So identity is the way we define ourselves. So your first task, if you look back at the Google form on Classroom, is I want you to try and sum up the statements above into one definition of identity in your own words. So looking back at those statements, looking back at what you know to be true about identity and what you believe, can you sum up in your own words a definition of identity? And then once you've done that, I would like you to consider the words in red and think about how they help us understand identity. So on the Google form, there's a box for each of those red words. If you're not sure on any of them, you can leave it blank. But what I'd like you to do is have a go at thinking about what that word helps us to understand about identity and what it is. So you've got the word concept. So there's a definition of concept on the form. I want you to have a think about what that tells us about identity. There's role-specific understanding. So have a think about that one. There's expectation, and there's also the word define. So have a look on the form and then fill in the blanks with your thoughts. Right, your next task is not on the form. This is just something for you to do on a piece of paper, but it will be important as we go forward. So you do need to make sure that you've got a nice copy of this somewhere in your papers. So I want you to mind map sources of identity. So by sources I mean where we get something from. So a source of food, for example, would be a supermarket. So I want you to mind map sources of identity. Where do we get our sense of identity from? What makes us who we are? and try and think of as many different things as you can. So think about all the ways that you are able to identify who you are. Think about objects, think about people, think about roles, think about places. Where do we get our identity? What makes us who we are? So now you've done your mind map, what you can now do is put some of those ideas, some of those sources of identity into categories. So what we'll do is we'll look at these categories first of all, because these 5 are the categories in which you will eventually be able to place all of the poems that we're going to study this term. So some of the poems that we're looking at relate to gender identity. So when we're talking about gender, you should know what it is we're talking about, but if you're not sure, have a look at the Google form and there is a definition of what we mean by gender identity, but you should know what that means. Cultural identity. Culture is slightly more complex in terms of the meaning of the word. So the culture that we all live in a culture. And culture is something that describes the way we live our lives. So a culture involves things that we do, the way that we speak, expectations of what goes on a day-to-day basis, what we consider to be right, what we consider to be wrong. That's culture. Culture is the way you live your life. Culture is something that can be built or created as well. So you can create your own culture by setting your own standards, by having your own rules and so on. So if you think about school, we have a certain culture that is Elsham High specific, that you might get similar cultures in other schools, but it won't be the same as the culture of Elsham High School. So culture is the way we do things, it's the way we live our lives, and it's something that can be built and created. It's something that can be changed and something that can grow over time. So that's culture, the way we live our lives. Societal identity. So this is about linking in with society, in which sense it's slightly more political, perhaps, than some other of these identity groupings. So societal identity might involve our political status, it might involve our wealth, it might involve our employment potentially, it might involve our place in society in terms of leadership or power. So societal identity is all about your place in the world as a whole. Familial identity there's a clue in the word there, that's anything linking into the idea of identity that comes to you via the concept of family. So this would be brothers, sisters, mothers, etc. Familial identity, anything that links into where we get our identity from, that is linked into the family. And then the final one, identity of heritage. Now heritage is interesting in terms of it links to culture, but it's slightly different. So heritage, if you think about the word inherit, if you inherit something, where does it come from? It's handed down to you, it's passed down. So heritage is about the aspects of our life that are handed down to us from previous generations. Heritage involves things that we do or say or are that are a result of history and habit and time. So heritage is part of culture, but it's specifically things that have been done that way before. So whereas culture, remember we said culture, you can create your own culture. You can't create your own heritage. You can add to what's there for the people after you, but you will all receive a heritage. You will all be part of a heritage, the people that have gone before you. And again, if you think back to the giver, it's back and back and back, as the giver kept saying to Jonas. That's heritage. We inherit certain traits, certain habits, certain rules, certain laws. So all of the sources you've written down for identity, hopefully you will be able to fit some of them into these categories. Your next task is on the form in Classroom, and this time I want you to think about how our emotions link to our sense of identity. And what I'd like you to do is have a look at the emotions listed here, which are shame, fear, pride, guilt, anger, helplessness, security, and safety. So think about those emotions, think about those states of being. And what I'd like you to do on the form is choose 3 of those emotions and see if you can find an example of a time when an aspect of your identity or of someone's identity might lead to that emotion. So think of a time when someone's identity might lead them to feel that emotion. So if I was to look at, for example, helplessness, if I was to look at helplessness and think, when might someone's identity make them feel helpless? Well, the immediate one that springs to mind would be, if I was to think back to the 1930s and 40s, if I was somebody who was of the Jewish faith in Europe, I would feel particularly helpless at that period of time. So that's when part of my identity might make me feel helpless. So your job is to choose 3 of those emotions and see if you can find an example of a moment when someone's identity might lead them to feel that emotion, and write them on the form. Following on from the previous task, we're now going to look at identity and power. And on the form in Google, I want you to see if you can answer the following questions. When can identity be seen as a strength? So when does our identity or someone's identity give them strength? Can you think about moments, situations, scenarios where identity could be a strength? And then the second part of that question is, when can identity be a weakness? So when might identity, someone's identity, be a weakness? And then the final part of the question is, can you think of a moment in history where identity has been used as a weapon? So when somebody has used identity in order to attack others, or when identity itself has been attacked. So now we're going to begin looking at our first poem. And this poem is actually from the GCSE anthology, and it's called Tissue. It's by a poet called Imtiaz Darker. It's, funnily enough, people think it's the most difficult poem in the anthology, but every time we've taught it at school, students always feel that it's the easiest. And it's, in many ways, the most rich in terms of things that you can say about it. And one of the reasons is that Tissue has a lot to say about identity. And it has a lot to say about the power of identity. So at the end of the next 3 lessons, so this is the first lesson, and at the end of the next 2, you will be able to write a response to the question, what is this poem saying about identity and power? So that's our overall aim for the next few lessons. In this lesson, at the end of this lesson, we're going to just have a look at the first 2 lines and see if we can work out what this poem is telling us already, just by looking at the first 2 lines. Next lesson, we'll read the whole thing and start going through stanza by stanza. So your first job is, on paper, write down the word tissue in the middle of the page, and then I want you to write down as many different associations with tissue that you can think of. As many different things as you can think of that spring to mind. In terms of things like what tissue is like, what are the properties of tissue, what kinds of tissue are there, what sort of colours do we associate with it, what kind of actions, when might you use tissue, what kind of strength does it have, and so on. Anything at all that springs to your mind about tissue. The record for this, set by Brandon in Year 11, is 42 associations. So see if you can beat Brandon's 42 associations with the word tissue. So here are the first 2 lines of the poem Tissue. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Now, what's that actually telling us? Well, first of all, the first line tells us that paper lets light shine through it. So on the form, your question is, what is the word that we use to describe a material that it's not transparent, as in you can't see through it, but it lets light shine through it? What is the word I'm looking for to describe a material that lets light shine through it, but you can't see through it, so it's not transparent? What is the word I'm looking for? Then, if we have a look then at the second line, it tells us that paper that lets the light shine through is what could alter things. Now, if you alter things, that means that you change them. So this opening couple of lines is basically telling us that this poet believes that paper, in its flimsiness, paper that's thin, that lets light shine through it, could change things. Paper could change things. Now, in a sense, you could argue that these lines represent a paradox. So a paradox is a statement or situation that seems impossible, but is also true. So the paradox here, if you look at the line down the middle of the slide, you can tear paper very easily. As you know, if you were to tear paper in front of you, don't, but if you were to do it, it would be very easy. There's a paradox here, because on the one side, this paper is thin, it's easy to tear, you can see light through it, it's flimsy, it's fragile, it's delicate. But this poet is telling us that this flimsy, fragile material can change things. So that's the question we've got to think about. What on earth is she trying to tell us about paper? How can paper be powerful? How can paper change anything? In order to answer that question, your next job, and this is on the Google form, you need to mind map all the different types of paper in our everyday lives. So have a think about physical paper that you come across on a day-to-day basis. So obviously you've got a clue there in one, you've got books. Think about the different types of books, though, that you come across on a day-to-day basis. And then think about all the different pieces of paper that you will be in contact with on a day-to-day basis. Even have a look around your house. What sort of paper is around the house? Have a look in your pockets. Have a look in your bags. Ask your family to think about paper that they come across on a day-to-day basis. Think about paper in terms of thin paper, but also things that are laminated are still counted as paper. So it's still card, is still paper, for example. It's the same sort of material, it's made of the same stuff. So even things that are laminated count, because it's just it's just a plastic covering. So all the different types of paper in our everyday lives, mind map those, write them out in Google form. Try and get as many as you possibly can. Again, our record was set the week before Christmas, actually, and it was, I think, 27 different types of paper in our everyday lives. Off you go. Okay, so here's the test moment. This is the possible light bulb moment. And I think you will have a light bulb moment. So, looking at all of those pieces of paper, all of those types of paper that we come across in our day-to-day lives, you now need to answer the question on the Google form, how does paper equal power? So thinking back to that paradox, paper that lets light shine through, flimsy paper, thin, fragile paper that can be ripped really quickly. How does paper equal power? Write your thoughts down, and then next lesson we'll have a look. Well done, and thank you for watching.